Welcome back to Sovereign Judgment. This is the kind of story that starts with a fine on HOA letterhead and ends with survey stakes in the ground, a board president on record, and a barn nobody could touch. They thought a $4,500 penalty would scare me into tearing down something my father built with his own hands. What they did not know was that the land under that barn had never belonged to them, never belonged to the subdivision, and, by the time they understood that, it belonged to me. Before we start, tell me where you are watching from in the comments. I always like seeing how far these stories travel. Here is what happened. The first thing I heard was the crack of a wooden gavel against a folding table. Not a judge's gavel, not anything official, just a walnut-handled prop the Harbor Ridge HOA president liked to carry into meetings because she thought it made people sit straighter. The room smelled like floor wax, burnt coffee, and wet wool coats. 46 residents sat in metal chairs inside the Westmere Grange Hall, all facing a projector screen where a photograph of my barn filled the wall. My barn. Weathered red siding, tin roof, north wall patched with cedar planks. My father had cut himself in 1989. 2 white cupolas, one leaning slightly west because of a storm that came through when I was 14. Under the photo, in bold letters, the slide said, "Unauthorized structure. Final enforcement review." At the front of the room, HOA President Meredith Calhoun stood with one hand on the table and the other wrapped around that gavel. She was 62, tall, narrow-shouldered, with silver hair pulled so tight it made her eyebrows look permanently raised. She wore a navy blazer with a gold Harbor Ridge pin fastened over her heart. She looked at me like the hearing had already happened and the sentence had already been written. "Mr. Ralston," she said, "this board is prepared to pursue removal of the barn and collection of the full $4,500 assessment unless you comply tonight." I had a manila folder on my lap. Inside it were certified deeds, survey maps, a stamped legal opinion, 2 county records, 3 photographs, and 1 purchase agreement that made every sentence she had just spoken meaningless. I did not open the folder yet. I looked at the screen. Then I looked at the board, and I said, "Before we discuss removal, I would like the association to identify the parcel number where you believe that barn sits." Meredith smiled. It was the kind of smile people use when they think paperwork is a weapon only they know how to hold. Then the county surveyor sitting 2 rows behind me cleared his throat. That was the moment the room changed. But to understand how a barn, a fine, and a forgotten strip of land brought an entire HOA board down, you have to go back to the first notice they taped to my gate. My name is Elias Ralston. For 23 years, I worked as a geodetic engineer. My job was boundaries. Not fences, not feelings. Boundaries. I spent most of my career measuring land for road projects, drainage districts, timber transfers, and easement disputes in Larkspur County. I know how a deed reads when someone wrote it carefully. I also know how it reads when someone copied old language they never understood. The property at the center of this story sits outside the fictional town of Marrow Creek on the north side of a private development called Harbor Ridge Estates. It is the kind of place people describe as quiet, though what they usually mean is controlled. Stone entrance sign, matching mailboxes, painted curb numbers, a homeowners association with a newsletter that used words like harmony and compliance more often than neighbor. My family's land bordered Harbor Ridge long before Harbor Ridge existed. My grandfather bought 81 acres in 1957 from a timber company that had gone under after 3 bad winters. He built a small white farmhouse near the creek and leased the upper meadow to a cattleman named Orson Bell. My father, Matthew Ralston, built the barn in 1989 after he retired from teaching vocational carpentry at South Larkspur High. He built it slowly. That is what I remember most. Not a construction crew. Not rented equipment except for 1 concrete mixer that coughed blue smoke every morning. Just my father, my Uncle Henry, and me handing boards up from the grass when I was old enough to lift them. The barn stood at the edge of a sloped meadow, about 900 feet east of the farmhouse. It stored tools, hay, seed, and, later, after the cattle lease ended, my father's old tractor, and the fishing canoe he never used but never sold. When my parents died, I inherited the farmhouse, the old equipment, and most of the acreage. Most. That word matters. Because in 1978, before my father built the barn, my grandfather sold a 50-foot wide access corridor along the southern edge of the property to a developer named Clifton Marsh. Marsh planned to build a subdivision there, but the deal collapsed before anything was recorded beyond the first transfer. The corridor was meant to become a utility buffer and private lane. For decades, everyone treated that strip like leftover land. The county taxed it separately. The developer abandoned it. The future HOA mowed beside it, but never owned it. My father used the meadow as he always had, because nobody objected, and because the barn appeared to sit on our side of the old fence line. That was the family understanding. But understandings are not deeds. In late March, after 3 weeks of cold rain, I drove down to the barn to check the roof seams. Water had been running under the north door, and I wanted to see whether the drainage trench needed cleaning. A white envelope was taped to the cattle gate. It had the Harbor Ridge crest printed in blue at the top, though my property was not inside Harbor Ridge and never had been. The envelope was sealed with clear packing tape that left a sticky rectangle on the cedar post when I pulled it off. Inside was a one-page notice of architectural violation. It said I had erected an unauthorized barn within the Harbor Ridge Visual Protection Corridor. It said the structure violated Article 7, Section 4 of the Harbor Ridge Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions. It said I owed an immediate $4,500 fine and had 14 days to remove the structure or submit a retroactive architectural application with a $750 review fee. At the bottom, in blue ink, was the signature of Meredith Calhoun, HOA president. I read it twice while standing in the mud. A red-winged blackbird was calling from the cattails by the drainage ditch. Rainwater dripped from the gate hinge onto the sleeve of my jacket. The barn sat exactly where it had sat for 37 years. I folded the notice back into thirds, put it in my truck, and drove home. I did not call Meredith. I did not post online. I did not drive to the HOA office and demand an explanation. I made coffee, took out a yellow legal pad, wrote the date and time at the top, and started a file. March 28th, 7:42 a.m. Notice found taped to East Cattlegate. Weather, light rain. No prior contact from Harbor Ridge HOA. The next morning, Meredith Calhoun arrived in person. She came in a pearl-white SUV with Harbor Ridge Resident Services printed on a magnetic door sign. 2 other board members followed in a gray sedan, Daniel Voss, treasurer, and Whitney Lane, architectural chair. They stopped outside my gate at 9:16 a.m. I know because my driveway camera recorded the plate, the timestamp, and the moment Meredith stepped carefully around a puddle in tan leather boots that were not made for mud. I walked down from the farmhouse carrying a clipboard. Meredith did not greet me like a neighbor. She greeted me like a defendant. "Mr. Ralston," she said, "I assume you received the board's notice." I did. "Then I'm glad we can handle this cooperatively." Daniel Voss stood behind her with a binder pressed to his chest. He had the nervous look of a man who liked numbers more than confrontation. Whitney Lane kept taking photographs of my gate, my driveway, and the barn beyond the field. I said, "What cooperation are you requesting?" Meredith gave a rehearsed breath. "The barn sits within Harbor Ridge's protected view corridor. That corridor is subject to our architectural rules. You did not apply for approval, and frankly, that structure is inconsistent with the community standard." I looked past her at the barn. The morning light had turned the wet roof dull silver. Swallows were already circling under the eaves. "That structure was built in 1989, I said. Meredith's smile did not move. "Age does not cure a violation. That depends on the authority behind the violation." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Mr. Ralston, Harbor Ridge has maintained that corridor for years. Our homeowners rely on that open view. The barn is an eyesore, and we have a duty to enforce." I wrote the word maintained on my clipboard. Then I asked the first question she could not answer. "What parcel number are you enforcing against?" She blinked. "The protected corridor." "That is not a parcel number. The corridor is clearly shown in our community materials. Community materials are not deeds." Whitney lowered her phone. Daniel Voss shifted the binder from one arm to the other. Meredith's face cooled. "I can see you intend to be difficult." "No," I said. "I intend to be precise." She took a step closer to the gate, but not through it. "You have 14 days. After that, the fine increases by $100 per day. We will also notify prospective buyers, insurers, and county permitting if necessary. I wrote that down too. Prospective buyers, insurers, county permitting. Then I said, please send all future communication in writing. Meredith looked at the barn again. You are going to wish you had handled this informally. That was the first sentence she gave me that would matter later. I spent the rest of that day doing what I used to be paid to do. I went to records, not opinions. Records. The Harbor Ridge Notice cited Article 7, Section 4 of the CC&Rs. So I started at the Larkspur County Recorder's online document portal. Harbor Ridge Estates had 3 recorded documents: the 2004 Declaration of Covenants, a 2009 landscaping amendment, and a 2017 short-term rental restriction. I downloaded all 3. Article 7 existed. Section 4 existed. But it did not say what Meredith claimed it said. It concerned exterior paint colors on residential dwellings within platted lots, not barns, not agricultural structures, not visual corridors, not neighboring land. Then I pulled the subdivision plat, Harbor Ridge Estates Phase 1, recorded June 18, 2004, Cabinet 12, Slide 88. Phase 2, recorded October 3, 2006, Cabinet 14, Slide 19. The plat showed 74 lots, 2 stormwater ponds, 3 private roads, and a 10-foot drainage easement along the north boundary. It did not show ownership of the 50-foot corridor. It did not show my barn. It did show something I had not expected: a thin strip between my inherited acreage and Harbor Ridge, labeled Unplatted Remainder, Marsh Development Holdings. I sat back in my chair. Marsh Development Holdings. That name belonged to Clifton Marsh, the developer from the 1978 corridor sale. My grandfather had told stories about him: smooth hands, city shoes, always promising roads that never arrived. I searched the state business registry. Marsh Development Holdings LLC had been administratively dissolved on September 11, 1996, for failure to file annual reports. Then I searched the county assessor's database. Parcel 19-4-118-00003. 50-foot corridor. 2.84 acres. Owner listed as Marsh Development Holdings LLC. Tax mailing address returned undeliverable since 2001. Annual taxes, $312.88. Delinquent balance, $7,914.62. The legal description was old, written in metes and bounds, but I could read it. Beginning at an iron pin near the east bank of Alder Run Creek, thence north, 88 degrees 14 minutes east, 2,476.32 feet. I traced the calls against the GIS overlay. Then I opened my father's barn survey from 1989. My father had hired a surveyor before he built, because he was careful by nature. The survey was folded inside a metal file box in our downstairs closet. The paper smelled like dust and machine oil. In the lower right corner was the seal of Harold Penwick, Professional Land Surveyor number 18047. The barn's southwest corner was marked 21 feet north of the old fence line. But the old fence line was not the boundary. The 1978 deed corridor ran north of the fence line in a slight arc. I scanned the survey and overlaid it with the county's parcel geometry. The barn did not sit entirely on my inherited land. The south wall, the loading ramp, and roughly 1/3 of the foundation sat on the forgotten marsh corridor. That was the flaw. Not in my favor yet, but not in the HOA's favor either. The HOA had fined me for a barn on land they did not own, under covenants that did not apply, using a visual corridor they had never recorded. And because the land under part of the barn was a tax-delinquent, dissolved company remnant parcel, there was a lawful way to acquire it, quietly. I did not tell Meredith. I did not tell the neighborhood. I created a second folder labeled Marsh Corridor and drove to the Larkspur County Administration Building the next morning. The tax office sat on the first floor, behind a glass window scratched from years of rings tapping against it. A clerk named Janessa Pike listened carefully while I asked about redemption rights on a dissolved LLC's delinquent property. She gave me the form. "Most people don't ask about parcels like this," she said. "Most people don't notice them," I said. By noon, I had ordered certified copies of the 1978 deed, the 2004 subdivision plat, the 1989 barn survey, the county tax history, and the administrative dissolution record. By 3:40 p.m., I had called a real estate attorney named Mara Ellison. Mara had handled boundary disputes in Larkspur County for 30 years. She had a narrow office above a pharmacy in Marrow Creek, and a habit of reading documents in complete silence before speaking. I sent her everything. She called me back the next morning. "Elias," she said, "do not respond to the HOA yet." I wasn't planning to. Good. Because this is not an architectural dispute. This is a standing problem, a title problem, and possibly a false collection practice if they keep invoicing you. What about the corridor parcel? That is where this becomes interesting. The HOA escalated before we did anything. On April 3rd, I received a second letter. This one came by certified mail. It said the fine had been entered against my property account with Harbor Ridge. I did not have a property account with Harbor Ridge. It said failure to pay could result in a lien. It included an invoice number, HR 4471B, and a line item that read, "Unauthorized agricultural structure, visible from lots 14-22, $4,500. I logged it. April 3, certified letter received. Tracking number 9414-8120-0883-2147-66. Claim of lien authority made against non-member property. On April 4th, Harbor Ridge posted about me on their private neighborhood page. A resident named Caleb Minter sent me a screenshot. Caleb owned Lot 17 and had been fined twice the year before for keeping a fishing boat behind his garage while he cared for his wife after surgery. He had never liked Meredith, but he had been too tired to fight her. The post was from Meredith. "Neighbors, we are addressing an unauthorized structure placed in our protected view corridor by a non-compliant adjacent owner. The board will not allow outside parties to degrade property values or ignore the standards our homeowners pay to preserve." She did not use my name, but she posted a photo of my barn. Then someone in the comments wrote, "Is this the Ralston place?" Meredith replied, "The board has been advised not to discuss names publicly. But yes, the structure near Alder Run is the one under enforcement." I saved the screenshot. On April 5th, Whitney Lane photographed my barn from the shoulder of the county road. She stood outside the fence, which was legal, but then she stepped over the cattle chain and walked 38 feet onto my driveway to get a better angle. My camera recorded her shoes sinking into the mud. I saved that too. On April 7th, Daniel Voss mailed a statement showing the fine had increased to $4,900 because of continued noncompliance. On April 9th, Meredith sent a letter to my insurance agent claiming the barn was an unpermitted liability exposure, subject to pending enforcement. My agent, Lyle Brenner, called me directly. "Elias," he said, "I have insured that barn since 1998. I know. Do they have authority over it? No. Then I will put their letter in the file and wait for your attorney." On April 10th, Meredith made her mistake. She sent a demand letter through a man named Roland Peak, who signed as counsel for Harbor Ridge Homeowners Association. The letter was full of expensive phrases: immediate corrective action, continuing violation, recovery of legal costs, notice to title carriers, recorded lien proceedings. But the letterhead looked wrong. It named Peak and Calder Legal Group, but I had never heard of that firm. I searched the state bar directory. Roland Peak had been licensed once, but his license had been suspended 8 months earlier for failure to comply with client trust accounting requirements. Mara Ellison saw it within 6 minutes. She sent me one sentence: "Do not answer this yourself." By then, Harbor Ridge had given us everything we needed: false authority, escalating fines, threats to third parties, public statements, and legal claims from a suspended attorney. Still, we moved slowly. That is the part people never understand. The satisfying moment only works if every step before it is boring, documented, and clean. On April 12th, Mara and I met in her office with a county surveyor named Owen Sutter. Owen had worked with me years earlier on a bridge replacement east of Marrow Creek. He was lean, gray-bearded, and patient with old legal descriptions. He spread 3 maps across Mara's conference table: my inherited parcel, the Marsh Corridor, Harbor Ridge Phase 2. Then he placed the 1989 barn survey on top and aligned the monuments. "There is no world," Owen said, tapping the paper, "where this barn sits inside Harbor Ridge Estates. Mara asked. Does any part of it sit on the marsh parcel? Yes. Approximately 32% of the footprint, including the southern apron. I looked at the map. And if I acquire the marsh parcel? Owen adjusted his glasses. Then the whole barn sits either on your inherited parcel or your newly acquired parcel. Harbor Ridge has no ownership interest in either. Mara leaned back. That answers one question. The second is whether the HOA ever had maintenance rights over the corridor. Owen shook his head. Not from the plat. Mara turned to me. Then here is the sequence. We stop the false collection activity. We acquire the corridor if the law allows. We record everything. We give notice. And only then do we confront them. Can we acquire it cleanly? I asked. Mara opened a folder. Through tax foreclosure purchase. Yes, if the county proceeds and no valid owner redeems. Because the LLC is dissolved, notice has to go to the last registered agent, the last mailing address, and publication. It will not be instant. It will be dull. Dull is good. Dull was good. For the next 6 weeks, the process moved through county offices, certified mail, publication notices, and waiting periods. The county had already initiated tax foreclosure on multiple abandoned parcels, including the Marsh Corridor. Mara filed my expression of interest and later my bid packet. I deposited the delinquent tax amount, administrative costs, title search fees, and required sale funds into escrow. Total cost, $18,742.31. That included the taxes, penalties, legal notices, recording charges, title work, and Mara's initial fee. People later asked why I would spend that much money instead of just fighting the $4,500 fine. Because the fine was not the real issue. The land was. The barn was. The ability of people with no authority to point at a piece of my family history and act like their letterhead was stronger than a deed was the issue. While the county process moved, Meredith kept building our case for us. On April 18th, she sent an email to all Harbor Ridge homeowners announcing that the Ralston barn matter would be discussed at the May board meeting. Caleb forwarded it to me. On April 21st, the HOA placed orange violation tags on 3 fence posts along the corridor. They were not on Harbor Ridge land. I photographed each tag before removing none of them. Instead, I called Mara. She told me to leave them in place until Owen could document them. On April 22nd at 8:30 a.m., Owen Sutter and his field assistant, Lacey Moreno, came out with GPS equipment and located each tag. They prepared a sealed exhibit showing the tags had been placed between 16 and 41 feet inside the Marsh Corridor, not inside any Harbor Ridge parcel or easement. On April 24th, Mara sent Harbor Ridge a formal cease and desist letter. It was 4 pages long. It stated that I was not a member of the Harbor Ridge HOA, that my property was not subject to its declaration, that the cited covenant did not apply to the barn, and that any attempt to lien my land would result in immediate legal action. It also demanded that they preserve all records related to the enforcement matter, including board emails, meeting minutes, invoices, social media posts, photographs, communications with Roland Peak, and any records concerning the Marsh Corridor. The next day, Meredith replied herself, not through counsel, herself. Her email said, "Your attempt to intimidate this board is rejected. Harbor Ridge has controlled and maintained this corridor for nearly 20 years. We will not allow a technicality to interfere with the welfare of our members. The barn will be removed." I printed that email on ivory paper and put it in the front of the folder. Because when someone admits in writing that the deed is a technicality, they have told you exactly who they are. By May 2nd, the tax foreclosure notices had been published twice in the Marrow Creek Register. No owner appeared. No creditor filed. No registered agent responded. By May 9th, the redemption period expired. On May 14th at 10:05 a.m., inside a small hearing room at the Larkspur County Courthouse, the tax sale deed for parcel 19-4-1118-00003 was issued to me. I remember the sound of the clerk's stamp. Heavy, final, ordinary. The kind of sound that changes ownership without raising its voice. I paid the balance by cashier's check. The deed was recorded at 11:27 a.m. in Book 882, page 441. The Marsh Corridor was mine. The land under the barn was mine. The ground Meredith claimed to control was mine. Still, I did not call her. Mara had warned me about that. Let her find out through the record, she said, and give her one clean chance to stop. That afternoon, Owen Sutter's crew placed new survey stakes along the corridor boundary. White stakes for the outer line. Blue flags for the drainage easement. Red flags around the barn apron where Harbor Ridge had been placing tags. At 2:15 p.m., I installed 3 signs on my side of the boundary. Private property. No HOA authority parcel. 19-4-1118-0000003. Access. By written permission only. Each sign was bolted to a cedar post, not nailed. I took photographs with a measuring tape in frame. At 3:02 p.m., Mara sent Harbor Ridge a second letter. This one included the recorded deed. It said that I had acquired the marsh corridor. It said Harbor Ridge was to remove all violation tags and cease all enforcement claims by May 20. It said no HOA representative, contractor, or agent had permission to enter the corridor or approach the barn for enforcement purposes. It also offered them a way out. Withdraw the fine. Correct the public statement. Confirm in writing that no lien would be pursued. That was all. No apology, no money, no humiliation. Just stop. Meredith did not stop. On May 17th, she arrived with 2 men in reflective vests and a pickup truck marked Ridgeline Compliance Services. The truck had a ladder rack, bolt cutters in the bed, and a stack of orange plastic fencing. My south camera captured them parking on Harbor Ridge's private road. My east camera captured them stepping across the newly surveyed boundary. I was inside the barn, replacing a broken latch on the tool room door. I heard Meredith before I saw her. That sign is invalid, she told one of the men. We have an easement. She did not have an easement. I walked out with my phone recording openly at my side. Good morning, I said. Meredith turned sharply. Her blazer that day was pale green, and the Harbor Ridge pin was still there. You are interfering with an enforcement action, she said. No, I said. You are standing on my property after written notice. One of the Ridgeline men looked from her to me. Meredith pointed at the barn. This structure remains in violation, and these contractors are authorized to secure the area pending removal. I said, authorized by whom? By the Harbor Ridge Board, not by the owner of the land. Her mouth tightened. We dispute your ownership. I held up a copy of the recorded deed. The county does not. The contractor closest to the truck took off his gloves. Meredith looked at him. Keep going. He did not. That was the second moment she gave me on camera that mattered later. I called the non-emergency sheriff's line. Deputy Marcus Vale arrived 21 minutes later in a tan cruiser, with dust along the doors and a dent near the rear bumper. He listened to Meredith first. She talked for 7 straight minutes. Protected corridor, community standards, long-standing maintenance, legal enforcement. Deputy Vale then turned to me. I handed him the deed, Mara's letter, and the survey exhibit. He read them on the hood of his cruiser while the May wind moved through the grass. Then he looked at Meredith. Ma'am, based on what I'm looking at, this appears to be Mr. Ralston's property. She crossed her arms. This is a civil matter. It may be, he said. But entering after written notice can become a trespass matter. I'm advising you and your contractors to leave. Meredith stared at him as if he had misunderstood his role. Deputy, this HOA represents 74 homes, and this deed represents this parcel. That sentence spread through Harbor Ridge faster than anything I could have posted. By evening, Caleb told me the neighborhood page had gone quiet except for one comment, asking why the board had spent HOA money enforcing land it did not own. The decisive move came 3 days later, not because I wanted theater, because once I owned the corridor, I had to secure it. For years, Harbor Ridge had been using part of that strip as informal overflow parking during summer pool events. They had been placing landscaping waste near the creek bank. Their maintenance contractor had been cutting across the lower meadow to reach a stormwater inlet, even though the recorded easement for that inlet was 10 feet south of my line. Mara advised a physical boundary. Owen marked it. The county confirmed no permit was required for a standard agricultural fence under 6 feet. I hired Bell & Sons Fencing, a local company run by the grandson of the cattleman who had once leased our meadow. At 6:40 a.m. on May 20th, 3 Bell & Sons trucks rolled up my gravel drive, carrying cedar posts, woven wire, and 2 steel farm gates. The morning was cool and clean. Fog sat low over Alder Run Creek. The barn roof caught the first light in long silver strips. I stood by the south wall with Owen Sutter, Mara Ellison, Deputy Vale, and a county code officer named Priya Nand. Everyone had a copy of the site plan. The fence was simple. 486 feet of woven wire along the Harbor Ridge side of the corridor. 2 locked gates, one at the old maintenance cut-through, one at the barn access lane. Set entirely on my land. No obstruction of any recorded drainage easement, no interference with emergency access, no drama, just posts in the ground where the record said they belonged. At 7:15, the first auger bit into the soil. Wet clay curled up around the blade. Cedar posts thudded from the truck bed. The smell of fresh-cut wood mixed with diesel and creek mud. At 7:31, Meredith arrived. She had Daniel Voss with her, and this time she brought 8 residents. Some looked angry, some looked confused. Caleb stood farther back with his arms folded, watching quietly. Meredith marched to the first gate post. "You cannot do this," she said. I looked at Deputy Vale. He stepped forward before I spoke. "Ma'am, stay on that side of the marked line. This is HOA maintained land." "No, ma'am, it is privately owned land." She pointed at me. "He bought it to retaliate." I said, "I bought it because part of my barn sits on it. That barn is still unauthorized. Not by any authority you have." One of the residents, a man I later learned was named Peter Malloy, said, "Meredith, did we own this land or not?" She did not answer him. The fencing crew kept working. Post by post, the informal power Harbor Ridge had assumed for years became visible as something it had never been. Permission without ownership, habit without deed, confidence without standing. By 10:08 a.m., the first gate was hung. By noon, the corridor was closed. The barn stood behind the new fence, still weathered, still imperfect, still exactly where my father had built it. Only now, the land record matched the truth on the ground. Meredith stood on the other side of the wire with her phone in her hand. "This is not over," she said. I believed her, and I was grateful she said it in front of witnesses. The public confrontation happened 6 days later at the Harbor Ridge Emergency Board meeting. I was not a member, so I had no right to attend a closed HOA session. But Meredith made one final mistake. She scheduled it as an open community forum because she wanted an audience. The notice went out to all residents, special meeting regarding external landowner interference and protection of community assets. Caleb forwarded it to Mara. Mara smiled when she read it. She invited the public, she said, so we will be very polite members of the public. We arrived at the Westmere Grange Hall at 6:20 p.m. on May 26th. Mara came with 2 binders. Owen brought a rolled survey. I carried the same manila folder I had used at the beginning. 46 residents attended. That number matters because Harbor Ridge only had 74 lots. Their bylaws required 30% attendance for non-budget member forums to make recommendations to the board. They had more than that. Meredith opened with the walnut gavel. She described me as an adjacent landowner who had exploited a tax technicality to obstruct a protected community corridor. She said the board had always understood the corridor to be part of Harbor Ridge's common visual assets. She said my barn was never approved and harmed property values. Then she displayed the photograph of my barn. Unauthorized structure. Final enforcement review. She asked the board to approve additional legal spending up to $25,000. Daniel Voss looked pale. Whitney Lane avoided looking at me. Then Meredith asked whether anyone wished to speak. Mara stood first. "My name is Mara Ellison," she said. "I represent Elias Ralston. Before this board votes to spend homeowner funds, I have one question." Meredith's jaw tightened. "This forum is for residents." Mara nodded. "You announced it as a public meeting regarding my client's property. You displayed a photograph of his barn. You named his actions. You requested funds to pursue him. My question is simple." The room went very quiet. Mara turned to the board. "What parcel number does Harbor Ridge Homeowners Association claim it owns, controls, or has enforcement authority over?" Meredith picked up a paper. "The protected corridor is shown in our community planning materials." Mara said, "That was not my question." Daniel Voss whispered something to Meredith. She ignored him. Mara placed a certified copy of the subdivision plat on the table. Is it Lot 1 through Lot 74? No answer. Is it the stormwater tract? No answer. Is it the 10-foot drainage easement? Meredith said. Our authority is not limited to ownership. Mara placed the recorded declaration beside the plat. Then please identify the covenant provision that applies to Mr. Ralston's non-member property. Meredith lifted her chin. Article 7, Section 4. Mara opened the declaration to Article 7, Section 4, and read it aloud. The section concerned approved exterior paint colors for residential dwellings located within Harbor Ridge Estates. No barns, no adjacent property, no corridor, no authority. People began shifting in their chairs. Peter Malloy raised his hand. Then why were we told the fine was valid? Meredith said. Because the board has relied on counsel. Mara placed the Roland Peak letter on the table. This counsel? Meredith froze. Mara continued, calmly. Roland Peak's law license was suspended on August 31 of last year. The state bar record is attached. He was not authorized to practice law when this demand letter was sent. That was when Daniel Voss put both hands over his face. But the final collapse did not come from Mara. It came from Meredith herself. Mara displayed Meredith's April 25 email on the projector. Your attempt to intimidate this board is rejected. Harbor Ridge has controlled and maintained this corridor for nearly 20 years. We will not allow a technicality to interfere with the welfare of our members. The barn will be removed. Mara let the room read it. Then she said, the technicality she refers to is the deed. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Caleb Minter stood. His voice shook, but he did not sit back down. My wife was recovering from surgery when this board fined us $800 for a boat parked behind our garage. I paid it because I thought they had checked the rules. Did anyone check? Another resident stood. Then another. By the end of the meeting, 13 homeowners had described fines, threats, or enforcement letters they now wanted reviewed. Meredith tried to regain control with the gavel. The first strike was loud. The second sounded smaller. The third did not stop anyone from talking. The legal resolution took longer than the confrontation, but it was far more permanent. On June 4th, Mara filed a civil action in Larkspur County Chancery Court, seeking declaratory judgment, injunctive relief, damages for slander of title, and recovery under the state's Unfair Collection Practices statute. The complaint named Harbor Ridge Homeowners Association, Meredith Calhoun in her official capacity, and Roland Peak individually, for unauthorized practice-related representations. We did not ask for anything dramatic. We asked the court to declare the obvious. Harbor Ridge had no authority over my barn. Harbor Ridge had no authority over parcel 19.4.118.000.003. Harbor Ridge could not fine, lien, enter, tag, photograph from private land, or threaten removal of structures on my property. We attached everything: the notices, the invoices, the screenshots, the suspended license record, the survey exhibits, the deed, the video of Meredith instructing contractors to continue after seeing recorded ownership, the insurance letter, the public meeting transcript. By then, Harbor Ridge's own insurer had appointed outside counsel. That attorney, Felicia Brandt, was professional, direct, and visibly unhappy with what she inherited. At the first hearing, Judge Alton Reeves asked one question that still stays with me. Counsel, what is the association's best document showing authority over Mr. Ralston's parcel? Felicia Brandt stood. Your Honor, after review, the association is not asserting ownership of the parcel. The room was silent. Judge Reeves looked over his glasses. Then why was the association asserting enforcement authority? Felicia paused. That issue is under internal review. It was the cleanest sentence she could have given. On July 18th, the court entered a declaratory judgment. It stated that my barn and corridor parcel were not subject to Harbor Ridge's declaration, architectural rules, fines, or lien authority. It permanently enjoined Harbor Ridge from entering my property, issuing enforcement notices against it, or representing to third parties that my structures were non-compliant with HOA rules. The court awarded $9,800 in statutory damages, $4,312 in costs, and $31,640 in attorney's fees. Total, $45,752. The amount mattered less than the language. The judgment said Harbor Ridge had acted without legal authority. after receiving documented notice of its lack of authority. That sentence ended Meredith's presidency. At a membership meeting on August 2nd, 58 of 74 lots submitted ballots. 49 voted to remove Meredith Calhoun from the board. 47 voted to remove Whitney Lane. Daniel Voss resigned before the vote and turned over 3 boxes of records to the new interim board. Those records showed Harbor Ridge had collected $38,600 in questionable architectural fines over 4 years, including fines for things the recorded covenants did not actually regulate. The new board hired an independent attorney named Graham Solis to review enforcement history. By September, 22 homeowners received refunds or credits, totaling $26,450. Caleb received his $800 back, plus the $75 late fee they had added when he was at the hospital with his wife. Roland Peak did not come through as cleanly. The state bar opened a disciplinary investigation after Mara filed a complaint with the demand letter attached. The county prosecutor charged him with 1 count of unauthorized practice of law related to the Harbor Ridge letter and 2 unrelated complaints that surfaced afterward. He entered a no-contest plea to the local charge and received 18 months of supervised probation, a $2,500 fine, and a prohibition on preparing legal demand letters while suspended. Meredith was not charged criminally. That disappointed some people, but not me. The court order was enough. The removal vote was enough. The public record was enough. The fact that every future title search, every board training, every new resident packet had to account for the Ralston judgment was enough. By October, Harbor Ridge had a new president, a retired school administrator named Nora Bellamy. She sent me a letter on plain white paper, not letterhead heavy with seals. It said, "Mr. Ralston, on behalf of the current board, we acknowledge that Harbor Ridge had no authority over your barn or corridor parcel. We have removed all references to enforcement against your property from our records. We regret the conduct that led to this dispute. It was not emotional. It was not dramatic. It was correct. I filed it behind the judgment. Then I went back to the barn. It was late afternoon. The kind of October light that turns everything copper for about 15 minutes before the temperature drops. The new fence had already started to weather from bright cedar into a softer gray. Leaves had gathered against the wire. The creek moved low and clear beyond the grass. I opened the barn door and stood inside for a while. It still smelled the way it had when my father was alive. Dry hay, old oil, pine dust, and sun-warmed tin. The workbench along the east wall still had his pencil marks on it. Near the door, under a shelf, I found one of his old carpenter's pencils, flattened on 2 sides, too short to sharpen. I thought about how little of justice looks like victory when you are standing alone after it is over. There was no cheering, no applause, just a barn still standing on land now properly recorded, behind a fence that should never have been necessary. Caleb came by the next week with his wife, Marin. She walked slowly with a cane, but she wanted to see the place. We stood near the south gate while swallows moved through the rafters. Caleb looked at the barn and said, "All this because they couldn't leave it alone." I said, "All this because nobody asked them to prove it sooner." That is the part I carry with me. False authority survives in the gap between a demand and the first person who asks for the document behind it. Meredith had the gavel, the letterhead, the meeting room, the title, the email list, and the confidence of someone who had not been questioned in years. My father had given me something quieter, a habit of measuring twice, a respect for records, and a barn built carefully enough that, even when the boundary turned out to be more complicated than anyone remembered, the truth could still be found. There are a few lessons I took from what happened. When anyone fines you, threatens you, or claims authority over your property, ask for the exact recorded document and the exact parcel number. Not a map in a brochure, not a neighborhood tradition. The recorded document. Never argue facts in a comment section when you can preserve evidence in a folder. Screenshots, certified letters, timestamps, photos with measurements, and recorded deeds did more than any angry response could have done. A long-used strip of land is not automatically common property. Maintenance, mowing, and assumptions do not replace ownership. If land matters, check the assessor, the recorder, and the legal description. Give the other side a clean chance to stop before you act. When they ignore written notice and continue anyway, The consequences belong to them. The barn is still there. The south wall still leans a fraction of an inch out of square. The cupola still points slightly west. The cedar fence still follows the line Owen Sutter marked, and the gate still closes with the same low metal sound every evening. Nobody from Harbor Ridge has crossed it since, and that is enough. If you have ever dealt with an HOA, a neighbor, or anyone who thought a title gave them more power than the law did, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, like and subscribe to Sovereign Judgment, where patience, paperwork, and the truth still have the final word.